When most people talk about legendary bikes, they bring up the same names again and again. But what about the ones that didn't make the covers? The ones that rode harder, lasted longer, or handled better, but were dismissed before they had a chance? The truth is, some of the best motorcycles ever built were never household names. Missed by the market, but not by the riders who really know, these are the 12 underrated motorcycles that are actually great. Number 12, Veloce Valiant. At a glance, the Veloce Valiant looked like a modest commuter. Nothing flashy, nothing aggressive. But that first impression is exactly what kept it from earning the credit it deserved. The Valiant was a technically refined machine that quietly outperformed many of its rivals in ways that still hold value today. It wasn't built to impress on paper. It was built to last, and to do so with a level of smoothness and attention to detail rarely seen in bikes of its size. Introduced in 1957, the Valiant was a 200 cubic centimeter, air-cooled, horizontally opposed twin, developed as a more advanced successor to the earlier LE models. Veloce engineers redesigned the engine with overhead valves and improved airflow while keeping the compact boxer layout. This brought the output to 12 horsepower, which allowed it to reach speeds over 70 miles per hour and cruise comfortably, impressive for a lightweight platform in its category. The Valiant wasn't about brute power. It was about refinement, mechanical balance, and exceptional fuel economy. Riders regularly reported over 100 miles per gallon, putting it ahead of many modern entry-level bikes even today. But it wasn't just the engine. The Valiant came with a foot-operated 4-speed gearbox, a full cradle frame, telescopic forks, and dual rear shocks, features that made it both stable and predictable on the road. The handling was composed, the ride quality was far above average, and the engine's boxer layout provided a level of vibration control that single-cylinder competitors couldn't match. From a mechanical standpoint, it was a remarkably well-thought-out motorcycle. Still, it never found commercial success. The issue was pricing. At nearly $1,680, the Valiant cost as much as many larger machines. A Triumph Tiger Cub, for example, could be had for just $1,190. That kind of gap made it difficult to justify the Valiant's value, even if it offered greater smoothness and higher quality. For many buyers, displacement and speed were easier to sell than subtle engineering. Styling may have played a role as well. The Valiant had a clean, upright profile, more practical than provocative. It didn't fit the image buyers were chasing in post-war Britain. But viewed today, those same traits become its strengths. It remains reliable, comfortable, and surprisingly capable for a bike of its era. The Veloce Valiant may never have been a sales success, but it remains one of the most mechanically refined motorcycles in its class. Underappreciated in its time, it now stands as proof that great engineering sometimes goes unnoticed, not because it fails, but because it's too quietly competent for its own good. Number 11, Honda Hawk GT. Some motorcycles don't just age well, they grow into their purpose. The Honda Hawk GT is one of those rare machines that was overlooked when it mattered most, yet proved itself in the long run. Introduced in the late 1980s, it arrived at a time when the market wasn't quite sure what to make of it. Too sporty to be a standard, too upright to be a sport bike, and too refined to be a budget commuter. It existed in a space that didn't yet have a name. At the core of the Hawk GT was a liquid-cooled, 647 cubic centimeter V-twin engine that produced around 58 horsepower and 31 pound-feet of torque. The numbers weren't groundbreaking, but they told only part of the story. This engine delivered a wide, usable power band with linear torque and a distinctive low-revving character that gave it real-world performance riders could trust. It wasn't built for drag strips, it was built for corners, back roads, and daily use. And in those conditions, it quietly outshined many of its spec sheet competitors. But the true brilliance of the Hawk GT came from its chassis. Honda equipped it with a twin-spar aluminum frame and a single-sided pro-arm swing arm, features usually reserved for much more expensive bikes. That combination gave the bike a level of handling precision and rigidity that most V-twins of the time couldn't approach. The short wheelbase and light wet weight made it quick to turn, easy to flick, and surprisingly stable through transitions. It rewarded smooth inputs and punished sloppy riding in a way that made it a favorite among experienced riders looking for feel over brute strength. Ergonomically, the bike was built for usability. The riding position was neutral and comfortable. The seat height stayed manageable at just over 30 inches, and the controls felt natural from the moment you climbed on. Whether navigating traffic or carving through tight sweepers, the Hawk GT carried itself with quiet confidence. There was no drama, no gimmick, just a well-engineered platform that felt more refined than its price tag suggested. Still, despite all of this, the Hawk GT never found a large audience. Its price sat awkwardly close to fully fared sport bikes, that came with higher top speeds and flashier styling. Buyers chasing outright performance looked elsewhere, and the Hawk was left behind. But those who took the time to understand it discovered a motorcycle that did nearly everything well without needing to shout about it. The Honda Hawk GT didn't ask for attention, and maybe that's why it never got the recognition it deserved. But beneath its quiet presence was a machine that offered balance, quality, and depth. A bike built to be ridden, not just admired. For those who still ride them today, that's more than enough. You've seen some unexpected contenders already, but we're far from done. The real surprises are still ahead. If you're into bikes that flew under the radar, like and subscribe now so you don't miss what's coming next. Number 10. Yamaha XV1000. From the first turn of the key, you sense the Yamaha XV1000 was crafted with intention, not trend chasing. Released in 1981, it represented Yamaha's bold attempt to fuse American cruiser torque with European chassis dynamics. The result may have been misunderstood at the time, but today reveals a bike that stands as a quietly impressive blend of character, comfort, and engineering balance. At its heart, the 1500 used a large, air-cooled V-twin, displacing 1,000 cubic centimeters. It delivered roughly 60 horsepower and about 50 pound-feet of torque. Those figures were modest compared to inline fours or heavyweight cruisers of the day. Yet the motor offered broad, tractable power from low RPM. Its camshaft and valve setup encouraged smooth response, and the engine felt solid and well-balanced, ideal for both open road and relaxed hauling. What made the 1000 really stand out was the chassis. Unlike most cruisers at that time, it used a more sporting frame geometry. The front rake and trail were tighter, and suspension travel was tuned to offer responsiveness over corner speed. It handled surprisingly well for a big VWN cruiser with composed turn-in and a planted feel. This flexibility gave riders confidence, whether cruising highways or threading through tight bends. Ergonomically, the 1000 struck a thoughtful compromise. Seat height came in around 31 inches, handlebars were wide and natural, and foot pegs offered a relaxed mid-position stance. Long journeys felt comfortable, while the riding triangle encouraged control and feel. That kind of ergonomic balance was rare among its contemporaries, many of which favored either slammed cruiser posture or rigid sport bike positioning. Fuel range and economy added to its underrated nature. The tank held approximately 4 gallons, and combined with smooth power delivery, riders saw well over 40 miles per gallon. That translated into real touring capability on a bike not designed as a dedicated tourer. It quietly outperformed many similar class models when it came to fuel efficiency and range, without compromising torque or highway cruise. Despite all of this, the 15th century never captured mainstream attention. Its appearance was understated, lacking the styling cues buyers gravitated toward in the early 80s. Marketing struggled to position it. It wasn't flashy enough for cruiser purists and too relaxed for sport touring fans. Press early on considered it awkwardly placed and unable to please either audience, so sales remained low and production lasted only a few years. But real riders who tried the 1000 discovered a bike of surprising coherence. Reviews from the era noted its pleasant feedback, forgiving nature, and ability to deliver enjoyable rides daily. It wasn't built for headlines, it was built for substance. Many still praise the bike's stability, predictable torque, and ride quality when touring alone or with a passenger. That rideability remains notable even today among vintage ride enthusiasts. The Yamaha 1000 is the kind of motorcycle that rides better than it reads, engineered to deliver real-world value beyond spec sheets and sizing charts. For anyone searching beyond the buzz for thoughtful design and everyday riding pleasure, the 1000 remains a surprising and rewarding find that is very much deserving of reappraisal. Number 9. Kawasaki ZL600 Eliminator. Some motorcycles fail not because they lacked performance, but because they defied classification. The Kawasaki ZL600 Eliminator was one of those bikes, a machine that delivered real capability, but never fit neatly into any category. Released in the mid-1980s, it carried cruiser styling on the outside, but held the heart of a sport bike underneath. That contradiction may have held it back in showrooms, but it's also what makes it worth a second look today. The ZL600 was powered by a liquid-cooled 4-cylinder engine, displacing 592 cubic centimeters. Borrowed from the high-revving GPZ series, this inline-4 was tuned slightly for street use, but retained its responsive character. Output reached roughly 74 horsepower, with torque coming in at around 33 pound-feet. While that power band demanded higher revs to access its full potential, The engine rewarded spirited riding with smooth acceleration and crisp throttle response across the range. Where this bike truly stood apart was in how it handled. While most cruisers of the era were built for relaxed, straight-line travel, the ZL600 offered a much more responsive and composed ride. Its long wheelbase and low stance gave it cruiser proportions, but the frame geometry, suspension tuning, and shaft drive layout allowed for surprisingly confident cornering. It could hold a line through a bend with stability that most traditional cruisers simply couldn't match. That blend of control and comfort extended into everyday usability. The low seat height, manageable weight, and user-friendly gearing made it approachable for a wide range of riders. Even in traffic or urban riding, the ZL remained balanced and easy to operate. Yet, when the road opened up, the engine's higher revving nature gave it enough pace to stay with sportier bikes of its class, provided the rider was willing to work the gearbox and keep the revs alive. Despite its many strengths, cruiser buyers weren't interested in high-revving inline fours, and sport bike riders were more focused on lightweight platforms with sharper ergonomics. The ZL600 offered the performance to back up its name, but the market never figured out what to do with a cruiser that needed to be revved. Its styling didn't help either. It was caught between minimalism and muscle, appealing to neither group fully. In hindsight, what hurt the ZL's sales is exactly what makes it valuable today. It offered sport bike performance in a cruiser layout, blending two worlds in a way that few others attempted. It may not have fit the mold, but it was better for it. And for riders willing to look beyond convention, the ZL600 Eliminator remains one of the most interesting and capable hybrids of its time. Number 8. Suzuki RF900R. The Suzuki RF900R arrived in the mid-1990s with a mission that didn't align with showroom trends. It wasn't built for the track, and it didn't try to dominate sales charts. What it offered instead was real-world ability, understated engineering, and a ride that made sense once the spec sheet stopped talking. Tucked beneath the fairing was a liquid-cooled four-cylinder engine, displacing 895 cubic centimeters. It made around 111 horsepower and about 67 pound-feet of torque, enough to move quickly but not enough to overwhelm the chassis. The power delivery was smooth and even, with a broad mid-range that felt more responsive than the numbers suggested. Unlike its GSXR cousins, this bike didn't need to be redlined to feel alive. The RF's engine came from good stock. It was a softened version of the mill found in the GSXR 1100, retuned for durability and street use. What that meant in practice was overbuilt reliability and a relaxed riding character that still responded when pushed. The steel frame, while heavier than aluminum, gave it a planted feel on the highway. And with dual front discs and a single rear, braking was strong without being grabby. Handling was always a quiet strength. The suspension didn't scream performance, but it worked, soaking up rough pavement and holding a confident line through corners. The ergonomics leaned toward the sport touring end of the spectrum, with a slightly forward riding position, a 30.9-inch seat height, and enough wind protection to stay comfortable above highway speeds. Long rides didn't punish the rider, and short rides still felt engaging. But that balance came at a cost, at least in terms of popularity. The RF900R didn't look aggressive enough for sport bike fans, and it wasn't soft enough for touring riders. The fairing design was polarizing, and the name lacked the racing heritage that defined the market back then. Buyers wanted edge, and Suzuki gave them function. That mismatch was enough to bury the RF before most riders had a chance to understand it. Today, though, it tells a different story. This is a bike that lasts. Owners still praise its bulletproof engine, comfortable ergonomics, and straightforward maintenance. It runs cool, rides steady, and holds together over serious mileage. It didn't need wings or bold graphics to prove its worth, just time. And over time, it became exactly what it was built to be, a motorcycle that works without needing to shout about it. Number 7. MZETZ250. The MZETZ250 never aimed to impress on paper, but for the riders who needed a machine to start every time, survive every trip, and stay fixable with basic tools, this one was hard to beat. Built in East Germany and introduced in the early 1980s, the ETZ250 came from a factory focused on practicality over polish. At the center of the bike sat a single-cylinder, air-cooled, two-stroke engine displacing 243 cubic centimeters. Output, was around 20 horsepower, with peak torque near 20 pound-feet, both arriving low in the rev range. That meant it moved quickly off the line, stayed responsive in tight city traffic, and didn't need to be pushed hard to do its job. What made the ETZ special wasn't how it performed in ideal conditions. It was how it kept going when conditions were anything but. The engine had a reputation for reliability, especially in cold weather. Maintenance was straightforward, and design choices like the fully enclosed chain and solid-state ignition helped extend service intervals. A 5-speed gearbox paired with a dry weight just above 300 pounds gave it enough pace for rural highways without overworking the motor. It also came equipped with features that were ahead of its time for the segment. A front disc brake offered stopping power few rivals could match in this category. The 12-volt electrical system made upgrades easier, and the frame geometry gave it a surprisingly composed ride. Seat height sat around 32 inches, and the upright riding position kept fatigue low, even after hours on the road. The reason it never gained much recognition outside its region had more to do with market timing than capability. In Western markets, two-strokes were already falling out of favor. Riders wanted refinement and styling, and the MZ offered neither. It looked basic, sounded industrial, and came from a brand few people understood. But those who did ride them found something else entirely in the form of dependability that outlasted expectations. For many owners, it wasn't a bike you bragged about, but it was the one that always got you home. It didn't try to be more than it was. It just worked, and that's exactly why it still matters. Number 6, Honda X11. Every once in a while, a motorcycle arrives that feels too refined to be raw and too potent to be polite. The Honda X11 was one such machine. Released in the mid-1990s, it borrowed the engine of the Super Blackbird, but stripped off fairings and pretensions, emerging as one of the first modern factory street fighters, long before that term became a marketing tool. At its core, the X11 featured a liquid-cooled inline 4-cylinder engine displacing 1,100 cubic centimeters. That motor produced about 113 horsepower at 8,000 revolutions per minute and nearly 67 pound-feet of torque at 6,000 revolutions per minute. Those figures were hardly headline grabbers in the era of hyperbikes, but the delivery was revealing. Immediate throttle response, smooth mid-range surge, and an effortless roll through speed that came without drama. What set the X11 apart was the packaging. Honda mounted that engine in a spacious, yet taut, aluminum frame, paired with refined suspension and big brakes. It lacked fairings, yet retained aerodynamic elements like a small nose cowl that added stability on open roads. Ergonomics struck a balance rarely seen on muscle bikes. The seat was set around 32 inches, the pegs mid-position, and the bars wide enough for control. The result was a bike that encouraged aggressive riding and absorbed long distances with poise. On twisty back roads, the X11 surprised critics and owners alike. Its weight, as delivered, hovered near 550 pounds wet, yet the chassis felt composed in bends, planted under braking, neutral under rapid steering input, and forgiving when conditions were less than perfect. It invited confidence. The engine's throttle mapping was linear and intuitive, making transitions through corners both predictable and satisfying. Fuel economy was respectable for such capacity, with riders seeing figures close to 35 miles per gallon. A 3.17-gallon tank gave reasonable touring range, and Honda included features like a center stand, an exposed oil cooler that made maintenance easier than on many Exotica. Quieter running and less heat transfer into the cockpit added to overall comfort. Yet despite these virtues, the X11 failed to resonate at launch. It didn't fit dealer expectations, too big for an everyday naked and too minimal for those chasing racing DNA. Critics at the time dismissed it as neither cruiser nor sport bike, ignoring the fact that it was rooted in both. Styling was bold, but conservative compared to emerging street fighters. And without the glam of a specific niche identity, it simply didn't register with many buyers. Today, the X11 tells a different story. Owners describe a bike that still feels effortless at speed, rewarding in the twisties, and calm on long runs. It didn't chase network headlines. It delivered structural balance, character, and longevity. In a world where bikes often try to do everything loudly, the Honda X11 proved that refinement and muscle could coexist without compromise. For those looking beyond hype and into substance, this bike still climbs in stature. It may have been overlooked by ideal buyers at launch, but the more you ride it, the more it makes sense. Number 5. Honda X4. Some bikes were built to intimidate, others were built to impress. But the Honda X4 was built to surprise, and it did so with size, torque, and an engine that felt like it belonged in a different category altogether. Introduced in the late 1990s, it looked like a muscle cruiser, but under the tank, it had something far more serious waiting to be unleashed. That something was a liquid-cooled inline-4, lifted straight from Honda's CB1300 line. Displacement came in at 1,263 cubic centimeters, making it one of the largest four-cylinder engines ever put into a naked bike of its era. Power wasn't subtle. The engine produced close to 130 horsepower, and torque figures hovered just below 88 pound-feet, giving it more shove at low RPM than most riders knew what to do with. But raw numbers don't explain why this bike deserves another look. What made the X4 special was how it delivered all that power without losing control. The throttle came alive early, with torque arriving just off idle and carrying through the mid-range. Whether rolling on in top gear or hammering out of a corner, the engine felt effortless, calm when you needed it, brutal when you didn't. And then there was the ride. While most muscle bikes struggled to stay composed under hard braking or fast cornering, the X4 felt balanced. Its low center of gravity, long wheelbase, and wide bars gave it leverage in tight spots, and the suspension, especially on the later Type LD models, kept the chassis steady. It wasn't light at over 550 pounds, but the weight worked in its favor. This was a bike that planted itself to the road and stayed there. Comfort, too, was a major part of the package. Seat height stayed around 31 inches. The riding triangle was relaxed, and wind protection, though minimal, was enough for high-speed riding. It could cruise all day without shaking the rider to pieces, and it never felt out of breath doing it. Still, it never took off. Maybe it looked too plain, or maybe it confused buyers who expected V-twin behavior from a muscle bike. But those who rode it didn't care. They knew what it was: a heavyweight with a sport bike heart and a chassis that never lost control of the conversation. The Honda X4 didn't chase trends. It chased torque. And for riders who still believe in big engines, linear power, and unshakable road presence, there's nothing else quite like it. Number 4. Yamaha TDM850. The Yamaha TDM850 didn't fail because it was flawed. It failed because it wasn't easy to label. When it launched in the early 1990s, riders didn't quite know what to make of it. It had tall suspension, upright bars, sport bike wheels, and an engine that sounded more like a rally machine than anything built for the street. At the center of it all was an 849 cubic centimeter liquid-cooled parallel twin. Yamaha tuned it for low-end response and mid-range flexibility, and the result was a power band that felt broad and easy to use. Output was around 77 horsepower, with torque peaking near 59 pound-feet. It wasn't a high-revving screamer or a lazy cruiser lump. It sat right in between, where real riders spend most of their time. But the engine alone didn't define it. The TDM used a steel Delta box frame, long travel suspension, and a 20-inch front wheel early on, eventually switching to 18 inches for better road manners. Seat height stayed above 31 inches, giving the bike a commanding view and excellent leverage. It felt tall, but not awkward. It leaned in willingly and stayed settled mid-corner in a way most tall bikes didn't. The riding position was pure function, upright, relaxed, with wide bars, and just enough wind protection to stay comfortable above highway speeds. Twin front discs gave it solid braking, and the 5-speed gearbox kept things simple. On back roads, it soaked up rough pavement with ease. In the city, it stayed agile. It was the kind of bike that made sense the moment you stopped trying to compare it to anything else. Still, it never took off. Critics didn't know what to do with a machine that wasn't a sport bike, wasn't a tourer, and wasn't a dual sport. The looks didn't help. The dual headlights and tall stance felt out of step with the market. Riders passed it over for machines with clear identities, and the TDM slowly faded from view. But that's exactly why it belongs here. The TDM850 was an early glimpse at the adventure sport formula years before it became popular. It offered real-world comfort, usable power, and the kind of durability that didn't need marketing to prove its point. Number 3. Moto Guzzi 511 Le Mans. Some motorcycles chase numbers, others chase ideas. The Moto Guzzi V11 Le Mans didn't bother with either. It was built with one goal: to feel like a machine. And in an era of rising electronics and shrinking character, that alone made it stand apart. Released in the early 2000s, The V11 Le Mans took inspiration from the original Le Mans of the 1970s, but it wasn't a retro bike. It was something else entirely, a modern interpretation of old-school performance, powered by an engine that refused to be anything but mechanical. That engine was an air-cooled, longitudinal V twin-displacing 1,064 cubic centimeters, producing 91 horsepower and 70 pound-feet of torque. Those numbers weren't extreme, but the way they arrived was unmistakably Guzzi, thick in the mid-range, full of pulse, and delivered with a drive shaft instead of a chain. The frame was a steel twin-spar design that used the engine as a structural member. Suspension was handled by 40mm Marsocchi forks up front and a rear monoshock out back, both offering adjustability without complexity. At speed, the bike didn't feel twitchy or vague. It felt grounded. That planted feel made it perfect for long sweepers and fast back roads, places where feedback mattered more than lean angle. Weight sat near 560 pounds, but it carried that weight low, and it never got in the way. Ergonomics were designed for distance, not posture. The seat was wide and sat just under 32 inches. Bars were low, but didn't demand a full lean, and the foot pegs fell naturally beneath the rider. Wind protection came from a sculpted half fairing that split air without creating pressure. Even after hours in the saddle, the Le Mans never felt punishing. It felt composed. Braking came from dual front discs, with 4-piston Brembo calipers and a single rear disc. The feel was firm, predictable, and suited to the bike's overall personality. Strong, but not aggressive. Fuel capacity sat just under 5 gallons, and combined with real-world economy near 40 miles per gallon, range was more than enough for touring without constant stops. So why didn't it catch on? In a market obsessed with lap times and spec sheets, the Le Mans wasn't loud enough. It didn't rev like a Japanese 4, it didn't have the flash of Italian rivals, and it didn't fit the rising trend of adventure bikes that were beginning to dominate the showroom floor. But none of that changes what it was. The V11 Le Mans was a rider's motorcycle, built with deliberate weight, tuned for real-world speed, and finished with a sense of mechanical honesty that's becoming harder to find. Number 2, BMW R1200ST. Whenever a manufacturer known for touring machines builds a sportier cousin, expectations run high, and that often becomes its downfall. The BMW R1200ST was that kind of bike. Introduced in 2005, it tried to blend boxer engine tradition with sporty ergonomics, elegant fairing, and sharp handling. Too road-oriented for adventure riders, too niche for sport tourer fans. It fell through the cracks, but it deserved better, and here's why. Underneath the fairing, BMW installed its familiar air-cooled, flat twin engine, displacing 1,199 cubic centimeters. Output was about 125 horsepower at 6,600 revolutions per minute, with torque figures hitting 113 pound-feet at 5,200 RPM. On paper, these numbers were solid but unremarkable among leader-class machines. What set it apart was how the boxer motor delivered. It was broad, linear, and smooth, with minimal vibration thanks to excellent shaft drive isolation from earlier engine iterations. The frame was a steel trellis design supplemented by an engine-as-stressed member layout. Suspension came via a 45mm inverted fork up front and a paralever single-sided swing arm at the rear. BMW's setup refined for composed road use, rather than aggressive track riding. With a wet weight around 506 pounds, the R1200ST felt light where it counted, up front, and stable through fast corners without feeling top-heavy. The balance encouraged confidence at pace. Ergonomically, the bike struck a rare harmony. The seat height hovered near 32 inches, and foot pegs stayed mid-positioned to support spirited riding without clinging to a full crouch. Handlebars were low but reachable, while the half fairing cut wind at speed without isolating the rider from the road. Whether touring on a long run or carving through mountain roads, this setup minimized fatigue without dulling engagement. That blend extended to braking and feel. Dual 320mm front discs, gripped by 4-piston calipers, offered controlled stopping power suited for its pace, and the fuel tank held nearly 5 gallons, which paired with real-world fuel economy near 40 miles per gallon, gave true flexibility and range. Even servicing remained accessible, with BMW's typical parts support and established maintenance intervals. Yet it struggled at launch. Many riders found fault in its styling. It looked understated, next to sharper sport bikes and friendless among towering adventure models. Others grumbled that the ST badge didn't convey identity. Dealers struggled to place it, and that ambiguity translated to poor sales. Critics labeled it neither sporty enough nor toury enough, missing that it was effective precisely because it refused to choose. But ignoring it means missing what it delivered: thoughtful coherence. Over years of riding and ownership, the R1200 ST earned praise for seamless power delivery, composed handling, casual touring ability, and nearly silent drivetrain. It didn't dominate by horsepower, but it delivered reliability and ride quality few machines in its segment matched. This bike wasn't built for headlines, it was built for roads, and for riders who understand that balance and integration often matter more than flash or hype. The BMW R1200 ST remains one of the most underrated motorcycles. Number 1. Buell XB12S Lightning. When a motorcycle refuses to play by the rules, it often finds itself overlooked. The Buell XB12S Lightning did exactly that. Launched in 2008, it wore a Harley-derived V-twin in a chassis that looked nothing like a cruiser. Its blend of raw torque, lightweight, and innovative design made it a standout, and yet it never gained the respect it deserved. At the heart of the Lightning was Buell's air-cooled pushrod V-twin, borrowed from the Harley Sportster, modified to displace 1,200 cubic centimeters. Despite its American roots, Buell tuned the motor to deliver rideable power across city streets and twisty backroads. The result was about 70 horsepower and 70 pound-feet of torque. That may not sound aggressive, but in a chassis weighing just under 412 pounds and with the engine held low, it translated into surprisingly brisk acceleration and playful control. What made the Lightning truly unique was its engineering philosophy. The frame wrapped around the fuel-in-frame design, placing mass centrally and minimizing unsprung weight. Buell used a single-sided swing arm, zero-torsion front brake mounting, and the patented rim-mounted disc brake to reduce gyroscopic forces. Fuel was stored in the aluminum frame to keep the center of gravity low, and the mass-centralizing approach gave the bike agility that few big twins could match. The handling was immediate. The narrow wheelbase and stiff chassis invited flicking through corners. Suspension front and rear was sporty, yet forgiving enough for street use. Brake feel was crisp and progressive, even without the usual cruise control aids or electronic intervention. The riding position put the pegs under you, bars slightly forward, and seat low enough for confident footing. You felt connected, in control, and rarely out of depth. Fuel economy wasn't the Lightning's headline, but it offered a decent range. With around 3.7 gallons of fuel capacity and real-world mileage, near 32 miles per gallon, it could handle longer runs without constant stoppage. Servicing remained relatively simple. Familiar components, chain drive, and minimal electronics gave it an approachable maintenance profile. Still, the XB12S Lightning didn't fit Harley's image, and many riders dismissed it as a half-baked Sportster knockoff. Dealers weren't sure how to position it, and critics often misread it as a novelty experiment instead of a thoughtful alternative. Its styling did little to help. It appeared Spartan in a world chasing fairings or high-tech display dashboards. But every rider who took time with it eventually recognized its strengths. The combination of torque, low weight, and precise chassis dynamics meant it accelerated like a muscle bike, handled like something much lighter, and stayed reliable even under hard use. That's what made the Buell XB12S Lightning such a rare success. It didn't care about categories or conventions. It just delivered raw, usable fun through smart engineering and a chassis that still holds its own today. Not every great motorcycle gets the attention it deserves. Some were simply ahead of their time. Others just misunderstood. If one of these machines brought back memories, or if we missed one that should have made the cut, tell us in the comments. Hit like, subscribe, and stick around for more.